Hello everyone, my name is Paul Ramsay. I teach, for those of you I haven't met, I think I've met most people in here, but for those of you who don't know me, I teach science and math to 10th graders. Speaking to a room full of experienced teachers I just want to know, my goal is not to say anything new about teaching pedagogy or change the field of education, but I do want to share something that I've learned in my classroom, and hopefully it will at least inspire a little bit of thought and reflection as it did for me. So I would like to take just a few minutes to talk about what I believe is the power of philosophy. To outline the thrust of what I want to talk about, there are two main driving forces behind how we design and deliver our instruction. One being our teaching philosophy, and the other being the reality that we see and experience daily in our classrooms. In an ideal world, we'd frame this in terms of sort of a causal relationship. So we would say something like, I have this beautiful philosophy, and that's why the reality that my students see looks the way it does. And this looks wonderful. It would be wonderful if our philosophies led to our realities, because teachers, one and all, have reasons for teaching and have our idea of what our classrooms look like academically, socially, and behaviorally. And that's what I would consider our philosophy of teaching. And it is beautiful, talking and hearing what people think things should look like. But unfortunately, things usually look a little bit more like this. More often than not, our philosophy and the reality that we see every day stand in stark contrast with one another. So we find ourselves saying things like, I have this beautiful philosophy, but I understand that it will never truly and fully be realized in the everyday for my students. And so it is very easy to say how we want things to look, but every time we see the reality and how it differs from our philosophy, which if our philosophy is something that's worth anything, this will happen regularly and all the time. We sort of start to see that there will inevitably be a gulf between what is ideal and real, and what's unfortunately is that without knowing it, we start to turn things around and let our philosophies, instead of define our reality, we let our realities look back and start affecting our philosophies, and we redefine what's important to us in the classroom. As teachers, this is like saying things like, that would be nice, but my students won't see or be able to do that. Or that would be difficult to bring into the classroom, so I'll probably just leave it out. Now, I'm not about to try to argue or prove that the gulf between what is ideal and what's real will ever disappear, or that one day, miraculously, all of our classrooms, or even one of our classrooms, is going to look like a perfect classroom. But with that said, I am not ready to agree or admit that this gulf cannot be pointed in the right direction and can be narrowing. So instead of letting this happen, my objective right now is to challenge myself, and hopefully inspire the same for y'all, to turn from this dichotomy and instead let our philosophies feed rather than flow from our reality. And I think that this is necessary not abstractly, but on a daily basis in a way that's absolutely crucial for our students' success in the classroom. As I get ready to get into just a specific example of what this looks like, I want to make an important clarification. I do believe that our teaching philosophy necessarily encompasses our entire classroom, the buzzword in education, our entire classroom culture, which is broken down into our academic philosophy, our behavioral philosophy, and the social expectations and norms that we will introduce in our classroom. But I don't think that the three can or should be separated. In fact, given the fact that we're teachers in the field of education, our classrooms are designed financially, logistically, intentionally to deliver academic information. So it's only logical that our entire culture starts with and is driven through the academics. We begin with the way we present academic objectives in our disciplines. And as we develop our language and way of relating to our students, we then communicate behavioral expectations and the social norms that we're going to enforce and reinforce in our classrooms. I do firmly believe that this is the necessary order of things, because if we get this backwards, if we get the order of these things backwards, then I think that we fall into the trap of using behavioral conditioning to require academic compliance rather than inspiring academic pursuit. And so in other words, the act of requiring encourages consequence avoidance. The act of inspiring encourages goal-oriented pursuit. And so if we talk a lot about behavior, the students feel required. If we talk a lot about our academic disciplines and our excitement about academics, then the students will then hopefully become inspired to pursue their interests in that subject. So with this, now this could be a whole other conversation, but with this I'll move on and say the first sort of philosophical idea that I wanted to share with y'all, it was sort of a reorientation back to what is important, most important in my philosophy, which is the primacy of academics. And not letting that focus be distracted from the everyday realities, by the everyday realities that I see in the classroom. So looking from there, let me give an example of how the difference between philosophy and reality actually plays itself out for me as a teacher. As a math teacher, part of my philosophy is that I would like for my students to harness their curiosity about the world around and engage the mathematical truths they learn in the classroom with the real world outside. So, for example, I'll take look at a picture of this triangle-shaped fern leaf. And I would love, on a daily basis, because this is a very colorful and interesting idea, looking at this beautiful leaf. But as a math teacher, it usually comes down to solving problems, improving behaviors. So on a daily basis, what my students see in reality is a bunch of lines, symbols, shapes that are organized well, but they're just that, they're just lines and shapes. And I can even look at this picture of a crane lifting an I-beam. It's a beautiful isosceles triangle. You cut it down the middle, it'll be two similar right triangles. But again, the reality my students see is these lines. Last, I'll show you, this is a cool picture of a triangle-shaped support system for an architecturally beautiful glass roof. And I can think about that and picture that as I'm doing the math, but the reality that my students see on a daily basis is just letters and symbols. When we get really excited, we throw in word problems. Anyway, the problem is when all the students see and hear me talk about as a math teacher in the classroom is these lines and shapes, then when they start to form their philosophies, all they've been given is these lines and shapes and numbers. And so if this is all that they have to make their philosophy from, who knows what their reality actually is? Well, when we look, we certainly see that their realities usually don't line up very well with there's technology in the classroom right there. Their realities don't exactly line up very well. So as I realized this, I started looking, let's take a look at an intro slide for a typical day in my geometry class. This is nice and colorful, it gets the point across. This is what I even have a little green accentuated box around the agenda to really spice things up. And then when they come in, I'll usually give them a warm-up, some simple simple problems. And then once we finish the warm-up, we'll talk about it a little bit. Then we'll go into some example problems to do some notes in terms of example problems. Then after we're done with those, I'll give them some independent practice and enrichment activity, perhaps to really get them excited because it's enriching. And then at the end of class, I'll give them some challenging problem that'll piece together what they learned today with last week and the week before, which always goes very well. But what I realize is that as I look through my day